Hello, this is a part-time economist, and today we're finally getting back into some of the economics and business-related material on the channel. Now, today we're going to be reviewing The Effective Executive by Peter Drucker. Now, first off, why should we listen to Peter? Why should we take his advice? Well, he's been a consultant with a large number of businesses, so what businesses will do is they will hire him to come in and assess their management, assess their policies and procedures, and tell them what they could do to become a more effective organization. So he has the real-world experience seeing not only good businessmen, but also businessmen who aren't meeting the standard, who aren't getting stuff done in the organization. In addition to this, he's written over 35 books, and he is a professor at a university. So he has both the real-world experience and the academic training to be an authoritative expert on the matter. So let's jump right in and see what he has to say. First off, what we're realizing is that more and more an executive isn't just the CEO of the company. I've kind of paraphrased some quotes from his book, but essentially he says that anyone who's expected to make decisions in the course of their work that can impact the organization as a whole, that person is an executive. Now, obviously, a CEO, a boss, a manager is an executive, but even if you don't have anyone that works underneath you, you can still be an executive. Let's say that you are a research scientist and you don't have anyone that you need to tell what to do, but you still make decisions that impacts where your research goes. You know, you could pursue this avenue or you could pursue that lead. You know, kind of like being a detective. You could follow this lead or you could follow that lead. So anyone whose work has to make a decision that impacts the organization is an executive. Secondly, the author says that there's no effective personality. In other words, a lot of people will say, oh, the effective executive needs to be this, this, and this. He needs to be a type A personality. He has to be a great public speaker. He has to be a people person. And the author actually devotes a whole full page to saying, I've known executives that were good with this, and I've known executives that were bad with this. I've known executives of all types. So what he's trying to say is that there's no specific personality that you need, but there are 5 practices, 5 things that specifically are done by effective executives. Now, let me briefly go over these. The first is managing time. Obviously, time's a scarce resource, and if we're wasting our time, we can't get done the important stuff that we need to do. One quick point. The author says that we need to chunk our available time into large blocks so that we can actually be productive. And this makes a lot of sense. Let's say that a manager has meetings and presentations and briefings they have to go to, and they only have 10, 15-minute blocks throughout the day. 10 to 15 minutes isn't really enough to get anything done of importance. You know, maybe check a few emails, but are you really setting the course of the organization with a few 10 to 15 minute blocks? No, you're barely having time to pull out papers from your desk and look them over before you have to put them back in the desk. So the author says that we should try to consolidate our time. Try to get those bigger blocks of time to where we can really go over the paperwork, we can go over the reports, and try to make effective decisions for the company. I'm going to skip choosing what to contribute because I want to talk about that in a little bit. Building on strengths. Now, most times in an organization, you can either build on strength or you can minimize weakness. And the author specifically says we should put people into the positions where they have a unique strength. The job of the manager, the supervisor, is to allow them to work to their potential, and then as a manager, we try to offset or work on their weak sides. And he gives the example of Ulysses S. Grant in the Civil War. As many of you know, in the American Civil War, during the beginning, the southern states were actually doing really well, making a lot of progress against the northern states. And Abraham Lincoln, as president of the North, he had quite a few generals before Grant who weren't bad generals. You know, there was nothing specifically wrong with them, but they didn't have that strength of military leadership that was needed to defeat the southern states. And Lincoln appointed Ulysses S. Grant to be in charge of all the Northern forces. And while Grant was recognized as a good tactician, a good military man, it was also widely known that he had a problem with the bottle. He liked to drink excessively. But Lincoln chose to focus on his strengths and said, I need a man that can defeat the Southern states. I need his military expertise. I will put him in this position because of his strengths. So that's just a real-life example that the author gives of building on strengths. Fourth, the effective executive needs to set the right priorities. One, this means focusing on things that actually matter to the organization. There's no sense doing something if it's not going to make a difference. So one, we need to focus on the things that matter, but two, we need to say no. We need to realize that as the CEO of the company, as the boss, as the manager, we can't do everything. We need to work on delegating, and we need to work on saying no to things that don't impact the organization. And lastly, the effective executive needs to make effective decisions. It doesn't matter if he manages his time properly and he builds on the strengths and sets priorities. At some point, the effective executive needs to make a call. He needs to say, yes, we're launching this new product. No, we're not launching this new product. He has to make the calls at some point. Now, I specifically want to talk about what can I contribute, which was one of the author's points, that the 5 things that effective executives do. We're asking, what can I contribute? And what an analyst does, he gives the example, he says, when he's interviewing the big heads of all the departments in a company, he's trying to find out about efficiency, about management. He says, what do you do that justifies being on the payroll? And he says he gets 2 different types of answers. The person who's a subordinate, now even if they're in charge of a large number of people, he calls them a subordinate because they have a subordinate mentality. He says, I manage 350 people in the accounting department, right? And this person is stressing downward. He's saying, hey, I'm in charge of these people. I manage these people. Now, someone who's a leader, someone who's an executive says, I provide the managers with certain products so that they can make decisions about future operations. The effective executive is looking up. He's not saying, what are the people underneath me doing? He's saying, what does management, what do the bosses need from me so that they can do their job? And essentially that is what we should be doing. We should be asking, what do other people need from me, from my department, from my section to contribute to the organization? And I actually want to give a personal story because I don't really get to give these a lot. But part of my time in the Army, I worked in a field artillery headquarters. And the neat thing about working in a headquarters is that there are people with all different job specialties there. Some people there were networkers. Some people did communications with the radios. Some people knew all about artillery. Some people did intelligence. And we all had to work together. And as an artillery headquarters, our specific task was to, 1, provide friendly artillery, so that the infantry, the friendly forces, we would give them fire support. But our second priority was to prevent enemy artillery from attacking friendly forces. So as a soldier in this kind of organization, I was working with people of all different jobs, and I had to ask, what does this organization need from me? What do I need to provide them so that they can do their job? And essentially what would happen is we would have radar systems, and anytime the enemy fired artillery at us, these radar systems would pick up every single round. So during the course of a battle, you could get hundreds of enemy locations. And the easy thing to do would be just send all of these locations to our intelligence analysts and let them figure it out. But what the organization really needed was, what does this mean? I see you have 100 times when the enemy shot artillery at us. What does this mean? And it would be my job to say, well, what this means to us, what this means to the commander is, this is where they like to shoot from. This is the kind of systems that are attacking us. So If I would have just sent them the raw information that I got, this would be somewhat useful to them, but by synthesizing it, by asking other people in the organization, what do you need from me? It allows us to function much better because they don't understand everything that I'm saying because we're different jobs, we have a different language. And it's the same in a business, it's the same in any organization, right? I'm not an accounting major. I don't know a lot of the terms that the accountants use. So if I have an accountant working for me, or if I'm working for an accountant, I'll say, what do you need? What kind of format should I put this in so that it's actually going to be meaningful information for the organization? Now, also, part of this is realizing that there are contributions you can't make. And the author talks a little bit about, you have the mid-level manager, or he even gives the example of the military. You have, a young officer, and they complain and say, oh, if only higher would do this, if only higher would give me more funding, if only the boss would give me more employees, I could do so much more things. And again, we're asking, what can I contribute? Not what do the bosses need to do for me, but what can I contribute? So, again, to use one of the examples from when I was in the military, a lot of times we would have a field operation or an exercise that we had to go to, and they would always change the time. First we'd be leaving at 10 in the morning, then we'd be leaving at lunch, then we'd be leaving in the middle of the night, and we never knew exactly when we would be leaving. So it would be easy to say, wow, if they would only figure out what they were doing, I could make my plans. But that goes against the spirit of asking, what can I contribute? So yes, I can't contribute a detailed plan, but what I can contribute is making sure that the guys that work for me have all their equipment. I can make sure that there's always one person on standby to relay any information to us while we're taking breaks. So, in conclusion, the Effective Executive book is not a textbook. It's a summary of lessons that the author has learned over the course of many years working not only in academics, but interacting with executives from all different sorts of companies. And overall, the book has very valuable insights. The one takeaway, if I could say anything from the book, is focus on what you can contribute. There's going to be a lot of obstacles. There's going to be a lot of different things that always come up. But as an effective executive, we need to think, what can we contribute to the organization? Because at the end of the day, an effective executive is anyone who gets the right things done. If we're getting the right things done, then we're being effective in the organization. This has been the Part-Time Economist. I hope that the review was useful, and we will see you next time.